Beware of dogma, it has a bite. Beware of dogma, it wants a fight. Beware of dogma, it will ignite a holy war by itself. Beware of dogma, it'll trap your mind, religious dogma. It'll make you blind. Beware of dogma, it's not designed to let you think for yourself. If we let it out in the universe, there will be no doubt everything is worse. Beware of dogma, don't let it loose, that unchained dogma. It'll reproduce, tie up your dogma. There's no excuse for ignorance anymore. Beware of dogma, don't let it loose, that unchained dogma. It'll reproduce, tie up your dogma. There's no excuse for ignorance anymore. Please clean up after your dogma. You notice that song was a tango style. And you probably know, some of you probably know, that the tango, when it originally was introduced, was outlawed by the church. The tango was sinful, it was sensuous, it came out of the bordellos of South America. So the church said no one should ever dance the tango. But of course, then what did everybody want to dance? I mean, what's more sexy than dancing the music that the church says you shouldn't dance? So they shot themselves in the foot. They did the same thing with other styles like the turkey trot and other musical styles. And if I get a chance, maybe I'll sing a song that Irving Berlin wrote, challenging the censorship of the church. He wrote a song in 1922. Maybe I'll try to end early enough to play that for you today. So my name's Dan Barker. I am co-president with Annie Laurie Gaylor of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Our national office is in Madison, Wisconsin. I just drove down here, a nice, beautiful morning to drive down to Skokie. And we have our national building there. We just expanded it a few years ago. And we have a legal department working to keep state and church separate, which is our main purpose, to keep religion and government separate. And right now there's 9 attorneys. We also have a newly formed C4 organization. If you know what that is, that's where we can do lobbying and endorsing of candidates. In fact, the first endorsement we made was for Janet Protasevich, the judge race up in Wisconsin, which was crucial and critical, and really showed the country that progressives are here and we are voting. So those 2 organizations are related. One's a nonprofit 501c3, the other one is political. We have a full-time lobbyist in DC. Our 9 attorneys in the legal department are very busy working, writing letters, filing lawsuits. You've probably seen us in the news. You may have seen the ad that Ron Reagan made for us on national TV, where he says, Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell. and that ad, originally CBS censored it. They wouldn't let us run it, but now they have relented. I think they need money, so they've relented, and we're running the ad. It's been on MSNBC, it's been on The Daily Show, it's been on Comedy Central, you've seen it on Rachel Maddow's show. CBS 60 Minutes, sometimes we run that ad on that. And there are free thinkers all over the country joining FFRF, wanting that first purpose to keep state and church separate. Our second purpose is to educate the public about the views of the non-theists. So most of our members are atheists and agnostics. Some call themselves secular humanists. Some of them call themselves nothing in particular. They don't want labels. One guy calls himself an theist because he doesn't know anything to call himself. But what we like to say is that it doesn't matter what we call ourselves, atheist, agnostic, humanist, we all disbelieve in the same God, so it doesn't matter. And our attorneys write lots of letters. We have a lot of victories keeping religion out of government just from writing letters without going to court. Going to court is expensive. Going to court is time-consuming. It's a big deal. And if you can stop an abuse by just sending a letter to this school principal or to this local postmaster or even to a governor's office, that goes a long way. And our team has racked up many, many, many hundreds of just victories stopping a violation by writing a letter. We do go to court as well sometimes, and I want to talk about the courts today. We have more than 40,000 members now in all the states and around the world too, a lot in Canada and around the world. And we have a national newspaper. There's a couple samples in the back there. We have a national radio show called Freethought Radio. We just did our 912th show this last week. We have a national TV show called Freethought Matters. Does that air in Chicago? I think it does. I think it's on Sunday mornings in Chicago. Freethought Matters. Coming up is the interview with Daniel C. Dennett, the philosopher. Wonderful, free-thinking, humanistic philosopher. He's written so many books, and his newest book is his autobiography about a life in philosophy, and he picked a great title for it, I've Been Thinking. What a great title for a biography of a philosopher. Just a really sweet guy. And he and I and Richard Dawkins, the scientist, we co-founded a group called the Clergy Project, which helps ministers, former ministers like me, and others who are still in the pulpit. There are clergy right now who are still preaching, and they hate it, they want to get out, but they need an exit strategy. So you can look up the Clergy Project online and find out more about that. And it's nice, this is a group that you don't have to join, because you have to be a professional member of the clergy, like a priest or a rabbi or a preacher. Or we have a couple of imams in the group, some nuns and former monks in that. And about a quarter of them are still in the pulpit wanting to get out. And so this is a way to not only help them, but to alert the world that there's a whole lot of ministers who actually don't believe what they're preaching. They're just up there doing it, or they change their mind in the middle of the road, and what are they going to do? So our main purpose at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we started in the mid-'70s as a national group. In 1978 became a national group. I joined in 1984, so I'm a newcomer to the group. And in 1984, Annie Laurie Gaylor, who with her mother Ann Gaylor had founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation in the 70s, they were invited to Chicago to be on Oprah Winfrey's show, AM Chicago. Do any of you remember watching that show, AM Chicago? And Oprah's producer said, we want to talk about atheism, but do you know anyone who was a believer who is now out? And they had just got my letter. I'd written Annie Laurie a letter. And so that day in 1984, you can watch it on live TV. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. That's the day that Annie Laurie and I met each other on that AM Chicago show and Oprah's show here in Chicago. So it's very meaningful to us to think about Chicago and that time. And a few years later, we got married, and we just celebrated our 36th anniversary, and now we are co-presidents of the foundation. And Oprah was asking things like, how can you say there's no God? Just look at nature. I've been to Wyoming. You can't go to Wyoming and deny that there's a God, can you? And that audience was, it was really great TV. Just Google like Oprah, Barker, Gaylor, AM Chicago. And one of the women in the audience pointed to Annie Laurie, the devil's in you, young woman, the devil's in you, you're possessed. And anyway, it was a fun show. It was great TV. It was the first time that I had ever publicly spoken about my atheism in front of a crowd. I just left 9 months earlier. I just left the ministry. And what do you do when you leave the pulpit? What do you do? What do you do with your life? And that's a struggle that people in the Clergy Project are dealing with. And so here I was talking not just for the first time about these things, and you can, if you see that show, you can see I'm struggling for the words to say that, which today just flow out naturally, but that was also the first time I'd ever spoken before a hostile audience. You know, if you're a preacher, your audience is like self-selected. They're coming because they love you and they praise God. And so it's easy. You can talk to them and you know the language. But when the audience doesn't like you, and that audience, most of them didn't, probably 80% of them were hostile, I actually loved that. I thought, wow. For the first time, I'm saying something that's actually making a real honest response from people. You know, you never know when you're in church if they're saying, yes, yes, great, praise God. But here they were, and I just loved it. I thought it was amazing. So since then, I've done a lot of public debates. Next month in Oxford in England, I'll be doing my 140th public debate, a public timed moderated debate. And this is the second time in Oxford. The topic is, "This House Believes God is a Delusion." So unlike last time when we were on the opposition, we are the proposition. I and Phil Zuckerman, if you know the sociologist Phil Zuckerman, has written a lot of great books about the nuns and religion. He and I are two of the debaters at that event. So I guess once a preacher, always a preacher. I don't know. Some of us are like that. We love to be out trying to make a difference. So the foundation grew since then. In 1984, there was less than 2,000 members, and now there's more than 40,000 members. And so we were able to expand our building in Madison. And the topic for today is about state-church separation. Is it dead or not? And some of us think, yes, it is dying. This idea of separation of church and state with the current court, the current Supreme Court, which has been packed by conservatives, it's on its deathbed. But this is because the religious right is on its deathbed in this country. If you look at history, the religious right, and now we're using the phrase Christian nationalists, most of them are Christian nationalists, and most of them are white Christian nationalists. They knew, and they have known, that they've been losing all of the culture wars, consistently losing and losing and losing. Birth control and prayer in the schools and gay rights and you name it. Progress is happening and they don't like it. They're losing the privilege they used to have. They used to think this is a white Christian country, and now being threatened by not just non-believers, the growth of the non-believers, but also immigrants and people who are not like them. So it makes a lot of them very, very uncomfortable that the status that they used to have, the privilege that they used to enjoy, is being eroded. And they are like, I think, a wounded animal in the forest who knows it's dying. And so it's trying to take everything down with it that it can, as it knows it's dying. And it is. It is dying. And you look at the polls and the surveys are pretty much opposed to the views of the current Supreme Court. So how did the court get to be the way it is? It was a very deliberate strategy. Way back, at least 20 years ago, and Leonard Leo and others back then were noticing this shift in our culture. We are getting more progressive, we're getting more liberal, we're getting less dogmatic, beware of dogma. And so Leonard Leo even admitted at least 20 years ago, maybe more, that, you know what, we're losing the war. The only way we can fight this war is by packing the courts. And since then, they have poured hundreds of millions of dollars into getting conservatives onto the courts at all levels, especially at the Supreme Court, with the Federalist Society, with other groups pouring money into getting conservative justice. And what does that tell you? If you think about that admission of his, what does that tell you? He's admitting that, you know what? If we don't pack the courts, the majority is going to win. If we don't pack the courts with our views, democracy is going to win. And we can't have that, can we? We can't have progressive Democrat. We need to maintain our privilege. So our organization, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we are not challenging the right of believers to believe. We're not challenging their rights. We all have the same rights in this country. What we are challenging is their privilege. They think they have this privilege. They think America was founded by Christian Europeans as a city on the hill for God, and this is the way America should be, and we need to be originalists, and we need to, even though not all the founders were Christians, and some of them were quite even anti-Christian and deists, we need to keep America the way it was. That's what the word conservative means, right? We want to conserve it. We don't want to lose the privilege and the power that we used to have. So we're not barging into their churches. We're not interfering with their private rights to advertise, to display, to put nativity scenes on their front lawns. That's fine, right? But when the nativity scene is at City Hall, that's different, because that's my City Hall and that's your City Hall. It belongs to all of us. So keeping state and church separate is not hostility to religion, it's equality. But those who had privilege, those who used to enjoy being a white Christian privileged American, condescending to everybody else in the country, including my Native American ancestors, my family are members of the Lenape tribe, the Delaware tribe, who almost went extinct after these loving Christians came over to this continent with a gun in one hand and the Bible in the other, spreading the love of Jesus to us. I keep hitting this mic here. But they used to feel that this was their country, and of course it's not. It's not a country with a sovereign Lord Master. We kicked out the king. We formed this country not from a sovereign top-down authority of whatever you want to call it, a god or a church or a monarch or whatever. What we did was we took, for the first time in history, we took a constitution and flipped it this way, and we say, not a sovereign, but we the people. It's a bottom-up country, not a top-down country. The Christian nationalists want a top-down country. They want a country that's governed from some supreme authority. But people who value equality and fairness and justice, we want a country that's bottom-up, which is what we have, at least on paper. That concept, when it comes to separation of church and state, is now being eroded because of the very successful strategic efforts of the Christian right to pack the courts. So now we have a 6-3 majority of conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court who are basically manipulating facts in favor of religious privilege. So, the First Amendment has 2 clauses dealing with religion. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So most of us in the business of fighting for the First Amendment, we refer to that first clause as the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, which means the government can't tell you what to believe. The government can't set up a church. The government can't do anything respecting an establishment of religion. We are free to believe what we want. And you know that famous letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptists in Connecticut, assuring them that the First Amendment, among other things, guarantees that there should be a wall of separation between church and state. That's not hostility. That's actually allowing freedom. If the government stays neutral, if the government backs off and says, hey, you talk among yourselves, the government's not going to get involved, well, that's beautiful. Then everybody's free. Everybody can be equal and free, and we can share our ideas, and we can argue among ourselves. But one thing we cannot do is ask the government to settle the argument. We can't say who's right and who's wrong, who are the insiders and who are the outsiders. Well, this current court, now bucking many, many, many decades of precedent, this current court is actually now deciding who is right and who is wrong. They are almost consistently siding in favor of Christians. And so this second clause of the First Amendment, prohibiting the free exercise, right? The free exercise clause, those two are always in some kind of a tension. What the free exercise clause was meant to do, it was to be a protection, that the government's not going to interfere with you. That's what Jefferson was saying to those Connecticut Baptists. This free exercise clause is protecting you. You're free. You can worship. You can go to church. You can go to synagogue. You can have your radio stations. You can print your books. You're free. This is a free exercise of religion. And that was like a shield, like a protection that believers in this country could feel good. Now we don't have to worry about the government imposing us, telling us that we're right or wrong. But what the current court is doing is taking that free exercise clause, and they're weaponizing it. They're turning a shield into a sword. They're using that idea of free exercise to say that any government hostility toward religion is an attack on religion, and they're taking cases they should not have even taken in the first place, cases that should have been dismissed for so many grounds because the conservative majority can do what it wants to do. So cases like, the football coach, the Coach Kennedy case. Most of you know about that in Bremerton, Washington. This coach had admitted that he wanted to be a coach so that he could lead players to Jesus. He wanted to be a high school coach so he could do that. So he became a coach, an assistant coach, and you probably have seen it all in the news. After every game, he would go out to the 50-yard line and kneel and pray, right? And the school correctly said, you know what, you're a coach, you're hired by us, you represent the school, you're a public servant, you shouldn't be doing your private religious things in public like that. And by the way, isn't there a verse in the Bible that says something like that? Don't be like the Pharisees in Matthew 5. Don't be like the Pharisees who like to be seen in public. When you pray, go into your closet and pray quietly. I'm not going to analyze theology for this coach, but obviously he was doing this in order to attract students and families to Christianity. So the school said to Coach Kennedy, you know what, you can do this somewhere else. Do it like a half hour later. You're free to pray, but the game is over. We're still an official school game, and you're out there kneeling. And he said no. He said, I have to do it this way. God has called me to do it this way. And when the school then started to push back against him, a lot of Christians in the community said, well, let's stand with Coach Kennedy. So then he would go to the 50-yard line, and a whole bunch of people would rush from the stands, and students, they would pray around him. And a lot of his players were thinking, I guess I'm on the team. I better get down, because if I'm not seen praying with the coach, maybe I won't get picked. There's this pressure when you're in school, and even at the college level. And some of them even said this. Some of the players even said that we felt pressure to go down there and pray with the coach. And then the big media storm happened. And so he wasn't fired. His contract was just not renewed. And so he sued. This is a case that never should have got to the Supreme Court, much less any court, really, because there was no longer a case in controversy. If you know the law, you need to have some live issue, some live damage, some live controversy. He moved to Florida, from Washington to Florida. He left the state, but he still sued, saying, I want my job back. He never wanted to go back to Washington State, but he wanted to make this issue to become this darling praying coach for the religious right. And the Supreme Court granted cert, which means that they said, let's hear the case. They never should have heard the case. He was out of the jurisdiction. He did not have any standing to sue. The school did the right thing. The school was following its policy, respecting the views of all students, not to feel pressured by an official coach. And for other reasons, that case should not have been taken. The Freedom from Religion Foundation has taken cases, and we've been bumped out of court on standing on much less grounds because they didn't want us to go into court. We had a case in 2006 challenging George Bush's faith-based initiative, and we actually won the court at the court level. We actually won at the appeals level here in Chicago. The Seventh Circuit agreed with us, but when it got to the Supreme Court, they found some way not to rule against us. They did not rule against us. They didn't say George Bush was doing the right thing with our tax money. What they said was, you don't have the standing to sue. And they came up with this weird argument that because there was no direct appropriation from Congress to the executive branch, it was technical. It was very arcane, and the issue came down to whether or not we even had the right to be in court. Did we even have an injury? And the Supreme Court at the time, we think, would have agreed with us, except Sandra Day O'Connor retired and was replaced. And we were hoping for a 5-4 this way, it went 5-4 against us. We did not lose the case on the merits. The court did not say we were wrong. The court just said, you can't go to court. You can't have standing. You can't even get into court. Well, Coach Kennedy had much less standing to sue, and should not have even got into the court, but the court wanted to hear this case. Why? They perceived that what was happening was hostility to religion. They perceived it as governmental hostility to religion because he was not allowed to, promote his faith. And then in order to get the decision this court wanted, they basically lied. The court was taken with one set of facts, but during the Supreme Court, the religious right organization that was defending the coach changed the facts and said, he's just a coach who's doing private prayer, and aren't public servants allowed to have private prayer? And Gorsuch and the majority accepted that argument, even though it was not true. And it is so not true that Justice Sotomayor in her dissent actually put a photograph in her dissent. They rarely do that. She put a picture showing Coach Kennedy with all these people huddled around him in prayer on the 50-yard line, showing what was actually happening. But the current sixth majority of the Supreme Court didn't care about the facts. They wanted to make their case. The same thing happened in the Masterpiece Case decision in Colorado, where this baker didn't want to make a cake for a gay couple. And the state of Colorado did the right thing because under civil rights law, you can't discriminate on those grounds. The state of Colorado did the right thing on this case, but the Supreme Court, they dug around and they found somebody in the state of Colorado actually made a remark that was a little bit critical of Christianity, and they said, aha! This is hostility toward Christianity. The government is not supposed to be hostile to religion. And so that case was dismissed. And then you know about the follow-up case, 303 Creative, a website designer, a wannabe website designer. She didn't even have a website. She just wanted to make a website for wedding planning. And she called it 303 Creative, because 303 is the area code there in the Denver area. And she, before she put up the website, she said, I want to announce on my website that I'm a Christian and I will not do gay marriages. I want to announce that. And state of Colorado said, you can't do that. I mean, you can't have a place of public accommodation that's for everybody and then discriminate. So in all of these cases, the religious actors want to basically use their faith to discriminate against others. And when the government comes in and says, you cannot discriminate, then they say, well, you're discriminating against me because I want to discriminate. So they're viewing hostility. They're taking this website designer, this cake baker, this coach, they have the freedom of religion. And if their religion says they should be bigoted, well, the government can't interfere with their bigotry, right? If they want to be bigoted, that's the freedom of religion. See how they've changed a shield into a sword. They've flipped it so that now they're using this to justify allowing people in public accommodation. Of course, they can be as bigoted as they want in their private lives. If you know the author Elie Mystal, who just wrote a book about a black guy's guide to the Constitution, he said, in my private home, I'm very bigoted. I admit I'm a bigoted person. I'm bigoted against stupid people. I'm bigoted against that. I can be that way, right? But if you're running a business, a place of public accommodation, there's civil rights laws. You cannot pick on these categories of people. You cannot discriminate against them. But now the current Supreme Court is saying, well, religious freedom allows people to do exactly that. And they're taking these cases, and when they shouldn't have. Some people asked, when Amy Coney Barrett was chosen after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, she became the sixth. It was a 5-4, basically, conservative. And when Amy Coney Barrett became the sixth justice, well, did that make any difference? They already had a majority, right? So it wasn't going to make a difference. It did make a huge difference. You know why? Because in order to hear a case, the Supreme Court, they call it grant cert. That's a writ of certiorari. In order to say, we're going to hear your case, whether we like it or not, 4 justices have to agree. 4 justices on the Supreme Court have to agree, yes, let's hear the case, we'll grant cert. That doesn't mean they know how they're going to decide, but they think it's worth hearing. Well, now with only 3 liberal justices on the court, how can they grant cert? How can the liberals say, here's a case we want to hear? The 6th majority now can freeze them out, and they can pick the cases they want to hear. And by the way, it's the 3 liberals are 3 women justices, which tells you something, doesn't it? So it's really chilling. And so cases that maybe the court should be taking will not be, and many cases that should not be taken because they lack standing or jurisdiction or for other technical reasons, the court is coming to a predetermined outcome. They want to maintain the privilege of Christian nationalists, and they're even starting to use phrases like that. And many people in government now, well, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene, we should be a Christian nation, she says. Luckily, there is some hope, I think, and it's not just wait until they die. I mean, that's that is one thing that happens. The older generation is dying off. In fact, only 80% of the people, older people who voted for Trump for the first time, they're gone now. And now there's like 25% more younger people since then who are now of voting age that are happening. So demographically, there's hope. Demographically, things are changing, but that court is there for life. So what's going to happen? So some of us think court reform is important. I don't know what you think about that here, but there's different models of court reform. Expanding is one of them. And there's many just basic secular reasons for expanding the court because of the workload. So that could be one possible solution. In the meantime, those of us who do care about progressive values, humanistic values, need to keep working and voting and agitating and writing letters and writing books and letting your members of Congress know, including now, just as of this week, there are now 19 members of the Congressional Freethought Caucus. Do you know what that is? You know how in Congress they have these caucuses for this or for that or for this group, or the gun caucus or the Lebanon caucus or whatever caucus they have. There's a Freethought Caucus started by Jared Huffman of California and Jamie Raskin, the famous Jamie Raskin of Maryland. The two of them got together, formed this Freethought Caucus in the House of Representatives that has now grown to 19 members. They're not all atheists. In fact, only one or two would call themselves non-believers. Most of them are very liberal religious people who agree with keeping state and church separate. And so we all cooperate. Those of us who care about state-church separation, it doesn't matter what our religion is. In Madison, where I live, even though more than half of our county is non-religious, which is pretty amazing, most of the believers, the Jews and the Christians, are also with us. We march in the same marches. We care about the same issues. The religion is not as important as human rights and human equality. The Freethought Caucus in the House of Representatives is like that as well. Most of them are not like advocates for atheism or free thought. They care about equality and democracy and fairness and justice. So now there's 19. They're hoping for the first senator, and we've approached a number of senators. Our lobbyist in D.C., Mark Dan, is very familiar with all of these people, and we work. And in fact, as you know, as a lobbyist, you get to be involved in suggesting and even helping write legislation. And many of the members of Congress appreciate that. They want to know what their constituents feel like. Our member of Congress in Madison, up where I live, is Mark Pocan, who basically says, I'm one of you guys. He gave a talk at our convention last week. He says, I'm with you guys. He doesn't come out and say he's an atheist, but I think maybe that's because, he thinks it's unpopular. It might affect his election. I don't know if that would hurt his election in our district. Jared Huffman in the Northern District of California, Jared Huffman came out as a non-believing agnostic humanist member of Congress. He's right now the most open one. And after he came out, people were wondering, uh-oh, is this going to hurt him? He's coming out as a non-believer. He did better in his next election. His next election was even stronger. People appreciated his honesty, and the voters said, what do we care what he believes or doesn't believe? We care about his policies. We care about his bills. We care about the issues. That's what we are working for. So there is hope with this younger generation. I hate to say that. I mean, we all like to think, isn't there some super magic bullet case we can take with beautiful logic and legal reasoning? We can take it to the Supreme Court and we can change everything back. That's not going to happen. The court already has, this conservative majority already has in their minds what they want. Well, look at Alito and the Dobbs decision. I mean, look at how crazy that was. And in inventing history and in bending facts to fit it. They are the Supreme Court, and we respect them at least in their position, but you can tell from their writings that they really do have an agenda. They are really legislating a Christian national agenda from the courts. So in the short run, the separation of state and church is under grave peril right now. We can't use the same arguments we used to use. In the Kennedy decision, for example, that praying coach in Washington, some of the justices even said, you know what, the old Lemon test is dead now. The Lemon test was a wonderful test that has served us for years and years. The Lemon test there was the case Lemon v. Kurtzman, that said a government action, in order to be constitutional under the religious clauses of the First Amendment, must have, number one, a secular purpose. Number two, it must have a primary effect that neither advances nor hinders religion. And number three, it must avoid excessive entanglement with religion. And for decades, the court was using that test. It has to have a secular purpose. Duh, it's a secular government. It can't have a religious purpose. It must have a primary effect that doesn't advance religion and doesn't entangle. And then O'Connor added what some call a fourth prong to the Lemon test of endorsement. The government cannot endorse religion. Well, in this Kennedy decision, this conservative majority just came flat out and said, you know what, we don't need that old Lemon test anymore. We're going to throw that out. And, of course, Sotomayor and the liberals dissented very strongly. I mean, why would we throw out something that has served us so well for so many years? So many cases that have been built on that kind of a precedent. And what the new court is saying, basically, and this isn't really codified, but basically what they're saying, there's two more important tests than the Lemon test. One is coercion. The government action can be religious as long as there's no coercion involved. As long as a teacher's not dragging a kid out of the desk and taking them to their church, you have to believe like me. As long as there's no coercion, then it's okay. And the second one is history. If the country has a long history of this practice, then we can allow it to stay. And that's what allowed that big 40-foot tall cross in Bladensburg to stay, a Christian cross that they later said, well, that was a war memorial. Because it had a long history, and because it has such a long history, it's now lost its original religious. And so when people see that cross, are they thinking Christianity, or are they just thinking some general vague civic, deism kind of thing? So that Bladensburg case should have gone the other way, but this conservative court found a way to protect and privilege religion. And what that usually boils down to is the Christian religion. Anything that has to do like with Jesus. And sometimes they're not outright direct about it, but the phrases they use. So this is not good news, but the good news, of course, is that our country is changing. And once we've tasted freedom, do we want to give it up? Look what happened after the Dobbs decision. Look what happened, how many women and men decided, wait a minute, you can't take away a basic right of human beings. And that's affecting now the last election and current elections. And I bet a lot of you are involved in politics and in voting as well. So as a nonprofit 501c3, we can't talk about politics or that, but our C4 can do that. So we can, as long as we're careful to separate those things. So, I used to be a preacher, and I could talk forever, how preachers. Did you know that the word reverend is a typo? Did you know that? The first letter used to be an N. You'll laugh about it tomorrow. You'll get it tomorrow. Do we do questions here, or should I just go do some songs, or what?
Yeah, in a minute. I'll introduce question period. If you want to close with a song, that'd be fine.
Okay, let me. What did I mention the song? Irving Berlin. Okay. So the church was outlawing music, and in the 1920s it was jazz music of the time, and not just the tango, but all this newfangled jazz music. And so a lot of composers and artists were pushing back against the censorship. Cole Porter wrote his musical Can Can as a direct rebuke to the church. But in 1922, Irving Berlin had had enough of this, and so he just built his music box theater there in Manhattan. And he had a musical review where he introduced a song, and in the song, the singer was a woman dressed in a red devil costume, and during the song, she came out and she was dispatching these jazz musicians down to hell. You're all going to hell. You're all going to hell. So this song is called Pack Up Your Sins and Go to the Devil in Hades. Oh, I got a message from below. 'Twas from a man I used to know. About a year or so ago, before he departed, he was just as happy as can be. I'll tell you what he said to me. He said, if ever you get heavy-hearted, pack up your sins and go to the devil in Hades. You'll meet the finest of gentlemen and the finest of ladies. They'd rather be down below than up above. Hades is full of thousands of Joneses and Browns, O'Hoolahans, Cohens and Bradys. You'll hear a heavenly tune that went to the devil because those jazz bands, they started picking it, they put a kick in it, a crazy lick in it. They've got a couple of old reformers in heaven, making them go to bed at 11. Pack up your sins and go to the devil, and you'll never have to go to bed at all. If you care to dwell where the weather is hot, H-E-double-L is a wonderful spot. If you need a rest and you're all out of sorts, Hades is the best of the winter resorts. Paradise doesn't compare. All the nice people are there. They come there from everywhere just to revel with Mr. Devil. Nothing on his mind but a couple of horns. Satan is waiting with his jazz band, and his band came from Alabama with a melody hot. No one gives a damn if it's music or not. Satan's melody makes you want to dance forever, and you'll never have to go to bed at all. Pack up your sins and go to the devil in Hades. You'll meet the finest of gentlemen and the finest of ladies. They'd rather be down below than up above. Hades is full of thousands of Joneses and Browns, O'Hoolahans, Cohen and Bradys. You'll hear a heavenly tune that went to the devil because those jazz bands, they started picking it, they put a lick in it, a crazy kick in it. They've got a couple of old reformers in heaven, making them go to bed at 11. Pack up your sins and go to the devil, and you'll never have to go to bed at all.
Thank you so much. In just a minute, we'll start the Q&A period, but first we're going to have another musical interlude, not nearly as entertaining as that one. So while you can gather your thoughts and think about the questions you want to ask, this also will allow us to ask for you to consider making a donation. So you can make contributions via our website if you're online. There's a QR code if you want to snap that and do that here in the audience, or there's a basket at the back. It's through our generosity that we can show how meaningful these Sunday morning programs are. So if you're able, we suggest a donation of $5, but really any amount or nothing is perfectly fine. We are really grateful for all those who sustain the society through their time and through their financial donations. So take a minute, get your questions in mind, and we'll be right back in a second and invite Dan up. All right, thank you all very much. Dan, I'm going to invite you to come back up. We'll have audience members who are here in person can line up at the microphone down here on the floor and ask their questions of Dan, and I will intersperse. If you're online and you have a question, you'll enter it into a comment box, and then I will read it out as your proxy. So let's get into some engaging conversation.
Unless I have my dates scrambled, did you know, that's my question, midterm elections are coming up very soon, about 2 weeks.
Yes. Thank you. I presume all of you are voters. Well,
I just wanted to hear how you answered Oprah about when she brought up Wyoming.
oh, yeah, I have to go back and look at that again. That was a while ago, but I don't know if I answered it. I think maybe Ann Gaylor answered that question. Oprah asked me at first, Dan, you were a minister. Why did you leave the faith? And I said, well, after so many decades of not being able to sleep in on Sunday morning. But I think Ann answered the question, nature is a result of a natural process of evolution, and the beauty that we see strikes us as beautiful because we are part of that nature, and we don't need anything supernatural to make it more beautiful. So, but you'll have to watch the exact show to see what she might have said. Ann basically said, all we need is kindness and reason. If you got kindness and you're reasonable, that's all you need.
Well, I'm wondering about the general idea of whether, we can blame all Christians for this, but we shouldn't probably. It seems like what's coming about now is very different from like the 70s beforehand, when many Christians said, we don't want to get involved in the secular world and politics. But that's changed by the 80s. Particularly a couple of members of the Supreme Court, Thomas and Barrett, belong to a really weird subsect of Catholicism, and much of the Federalist Society does that too. Also, going back before the 70s, abortion was not particularly an issue for many Christians, including Baptists, except for Catholics. But somehow around 1980 or so, this all changed, and they became very political, and it seems like a small subset of Christians now claim Christianity for themselves that's representing all the things you just talked about. So I'm wondering if you could just generally explain what happened and why. And again, these people are not defending all of Christianity, they're defending their own personal Christianity.
Yeah, because not all Christians agree with them. And there's a group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism, run by Amanda Tyler. She's the head of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. And her group, the Baptist Joint Committee, and our group, FFRF, we cooperated to produce a joint report about the January 6th insurrection, showing how Christian nationalism was deeply involved in that whole thing. And you can go online, go to either the Baptist Joint Committee's website and look up that report, or go to our website and look at it as well, showing the Christian imagery, the Christian backing to all of that. And there was a man named Paul Weyrich, who was a Christian activist years ago. They realized that they were losing ground, that the country was becoming less Christian, and they hated it. They thought Christianity was the reason why we have a country in the first place. And really, the issue back then, which they're keeping kind of quiet, was race, because the court said that Bob Jones University could not discriminate against race in their organizations, and that really angered them, because really Christian nationalism is primarily white Christian nationalism, and they don't even have to say that. They just have to say our Christian values are being attacked. Subtext: the founders. Look at the images of the founding of our country. They're all white people, right? And then white Christians in a city on a hill. So Weyrich and Jerry Falwell realized, and they got together and talked about this. It wouldn't be popular to bring up the race thing right now. I mean, now with civil rights and all that, we need an issue a single simplistic issue that will unite, not just, and Wyrick was Catholic, not just, not just the evangelicals, but all Christians to be a voting bloc. And they picked abortion. And you're right, before that, abortion was not a big deal. In fact, even today, most Christian denominations and religious groups support a woman's right to choose for her own life. They don't see it as murder. But they picked abortion as the issue, and it became such a simplistic, easy, are you for abortion or not? That gave them this huge political power. There were other issues involved as well, but it was calculated, it was deliberate. And then, of course, now with the packing of the courts, that's also calculated. And they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this. They basically have bought the court. They've spent this money to buy the court for themselves, which I think shows desperation. I think they know they're losing, they're admitting they're losing, and so they need to be as focused and simplistic as they can to get voters to vote for Christian nationalism. Well, it looks like if the trends continue, they're going to keep losing. And who knows what's going to happen with the courts.
A question from one of our online viewers. In your opinion, is there any room for religion in public life? And if so, could you give us an example?
Is there any room for religion in public life? Well, government can legitimately accommodate religion. And of course, religion has to be, the IRS deals with religion and nonprofits. And so there's all these, there's building codes. This building is subject to building codes, and so are churches, right? So there's always going to be some kind of a relationship between the church and the state in some accommodating way, as long as it's not promoting or endorsing what we feel. We feel in our organization that the government should be strictly neutral when it comes to religious matters. And we don't care too much if a public servant says, God bless you at the end. I mean, it grates us because there's a lot of Americans who don't believe in God, and why is that person? But we realize that's their personal view. It's not the official view of the government. Like our money does say it, in God we trust. In fact, we sued to have that removed. We were the third people to try back in the 90s, and the court told us, you can imagine, the court said, you can't sue over in God we trust because it's not a religious phrase. That's what the court told us. It's not a religious phrase, so we can't sue. We even had a survey. So, if somebody wants to say God bless America, we kind of cringe, but still we're not thinking that Biden or others are actually using that to force their religion on people. That's their personal views. If a public high school has a winter concert that has one Christmas carol in it, then we're not going to complain about that. But if it's 80% or if it's all Christmas carols and if it's being held in the local church, well then yeah, that's like an endorsement. That's like pushing. So there is some wiggle room in the joints, they say. In the court decisions, they talk about the wiggle room in the joints between the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. So we often have to look at intent. What was the intent? Is this high school choir director actually the church choir director too? And they're mixing religion and government. So you have to look at, each case has to be looked at on its own merits.
Hi. So I want to kind of pick a bone a little bit with your interpretation of what the court decided in 303 Creative. I'm reading from an editorial by David French, who is a columnist for New York Times, and what he says that despite the very wide coverage and your characterization of it, that it just sort of endorsed bigotry, specifically this was a First Amendment right not to speak. The Lori Smith was, quote, willing to work with all people regardless of classification such as race, creed, sexual orientation, and gender, and she will gladly create custom graphics and websites for clients of any sexual orientation. She was simply not willing to design websites that contain messages that violated her religious beliefs, and both parties stipulated that this was indeed a matter of expression. So I think there's a valid argument to characterize what happened in that case as no compelled speech by government. So I just want to offer it up for your thoughts.
Yes, and you're right that the case was decided not on religious grounds, but on free speech grounds. They turned it into a free speech case But we think the court took that angle because they know what's going on. She wanted to put on her website, I will not design, I will not help accommodate wedding planning for gay people. She wanted to announce that. That's bigotry. She wanted to be able to say that. Yet the court found a way to, well, let's get around this religious bigotry and turn this into a free speech case. So yes, there is that argument, and it is true that it wasn't decided on Establishment Clause grounds. So, and we all know what's going on. She personally is bigoted against gays and wants to make sure that she doesn't have to work with them. It's not like somebody's going to ask her, could you jump out of a wedding cake and say, I love gays? They're not asking her to say that. They're designing their own cake. Basically, her website basically is just like, here's the link to the, to the shopping catalogs that you can buy your stuff like that. It was basically, and she didn't even have a website, and she didn't even have a customer, and she had never had a complaint about anybody, which should have kept it from getting into court in the first place. So it's true that it was a first free speech case, but we can't discount the motive of the justices themselves in even taking that case in the first place to view what they think was hostility toward religion.
Since I found out there are no more questions online, I will speak after that person.
Okay, yeah. Hey, I'm wondering if FFRF, did I say that right? Yeah, has any issues at all with America's political and military support of Israel, or if that is not in any way something that you all would have an issue with.
Well, I will say I know that a lot of the people who work with the group have very strong feelings about that. But as you are right, as an organization, we don't make that kind of a comment. We can only comment on direct religious involvement, and some do characterize this as a holy war, religion against religion. Some say that, but FFRF isn't taking a position on that right now. I have some personal, really strong opinions about it, but this is not the platform for us to express those, I don't think.
I have a question for you about another question about whether you take positions or not. So I'm a librarian and I teach future librarians, and of course with all the book challenges that are happening and book bans, and many of them are related to race or related to things that could be seen as aligned with what you were talking about earlier, sort of this Christian nationalist ideology. Do you ever get involved in anything to do with book challenges or book bannings, or it really has to clearly be related to religion is what I'm hearing?
We do, because it often is related to religion or to the agenda of the religious right to squelch gay rights, for example, or trans rights in that. We actually had 2 trans people at our convention this year introducing student essay winners. It was really fun. It added a lot of color to our meeting. We have a billboard in, is it Colorado right now? I think it's Colorado, about book banning. And we quote Isaac Asimov on the billboard. It says, any book worth banning is a book worth reading, which... So yeah, and it often has to do with religion, and we will comment on it. And a lot of these issues are like kind of cloaked religion. They're not coming out and saying, but we know what their agenda is. So did you just read this week a school library in Florida removed a book because the author's last name was gay? It had nothing to do with anything, but it was a children's book, but the last name of the author was gay. So they can't have any gay authors, I guess. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned very briefly Leo Leonard, and I found that an interesting coincidence because each time I leave the society, I turn on NPR, and they're doing On the Media. And they've had a 3-part series on who Leo Leonard is. They call it Let's Not Talk About Leo. So could you just mention a little bit about his role and how influential he's been?
Well, besides the fact that he's got a lot of money and a lot of friends with a lot of money, and money talks, and we see even now what many of us are convinced is corruption on the Supreme Court, or at least violating ethical standards. He founded a group called the Federalist Society, and the Federalist Society is profiling and recommending judges to the government. And under Trump, of course, Trump didn't know any of this stuff. He just said, well, who should I pick for the Supreme Court? And the Federalist Society hand-fed these people to him. So they are pushing a lot of money and a lot of influence into shaping the court like they want it, which, like I said earlier, I think it is an admission of defeat, because they know that if we let democracy win, that they're losing, and they are losing. In the big picture, they're losing, but in the short run, they are very, very, very dangerous people. But what is that thing about Leo Leonard? It's a documentary, or?
Yeah, it was a 3-part series on who he is, how he acquired his influence, how he's been instrumental in society
Yeah.
in getting judges appointed at the state and federal level.
Mhm. And if he didn't have any money, how powerful would he be? You know?
Good morning. Thanks for coming and talking with us. I wanted to ask a question about your organization, and you mentioned how much you had grown. I guess it's in a 40-year period of time, but that's tremendous growth from, what, 2,000 or 4,000 to 40,000. And I'm curious what you attributed the growth of your organization, and specifically, are you out there trying to get members? You mentioned a billboard just now. And you said you're a national organization, so locally, how do people get involved, or how is it that you are growing so tremendously?
So from the beginning, Ann Gaylor's philosophy was build it and they will come. If what you're doing is attractive, it will attract people to do it. And so we're not real big on, you know, fundraising, asking people for money. We just hope people will like what we do and they'll support us, and they do, which is pretty neat. And in the last 8 or 10 years, a lot of our growth is that one Ron Reagan ad. That one ad has been really helpful for us. Maybe almost half of our new members are coming because of that ad. And there's a prestige there, there's a credibility there. When Mark Dan, our lobbyist, is talking to members of Congress, they'll say, oh, you're that group with the Ron Reagan ad. Oh, I know about you guys. So that really helps a lot. And he was so personable and so friendly, and yet he said that line about not afraid of burning in hell. And so we have some T-shirts that say that, not afraid of burning in hell. So that's part of it, but also the legal work that we do. And, we all don't have a lot of money. What group are we going to give to? We all have these causes we want to do. You can check us out on Charity Navigator. Charity Navigator is a site where you can look at any nonprofit that's filing their 990 forms. You can check them out. So we have consistently had the highest level 4-star 100% for a long, long, long time. And that goes a long way. People do check you out. They want to know, how's my money being spent? Sometimes you might want to give money to help blankets for the starving babies in Arizona. And that's one, I would like to do that. But then you look at their website, only 3 cents of every dollar actually goes to a blanket. You know what I mean? You have to, how is their money being spent? So that's a big help to us, that we're doing the work that we promised to do. And then, of course, being in the news, whenever we make a complaint and have a victory in, Birmingham or in Spokane or something, the local news wants to make a story out of it. And so people see us on TV. And then with major lawsuits, of course, we just joined this coalition suing in Oklahoma over the first creation of a public religious charter school, believe it or not, which is an oxymoron, a public religious school. And in spite of the fact the Attorney General, who's a Republican, opposed it, they went ahead and did it. And the Attorney General, by the way, is filing his own lawsuit against his own state. And he's great. And so we're filing with ACLU and Americans United and some other groups to try to stop that. So when you do things like that, you get noticed. People say, I like that. I want to join a group that's actually making a difference. And, it's great to talk. We like to get together and talk. We have our meetings and our debates and our conferences. But Ann Gaylor used to say, when all is said and done, usually more is said than done. And people like you want to support, you want to make a real difference. You want to know that you're helping make a real difference. And so our group has that reputation.
Can you talk a little bit more about the decision-making process for which cases you'll get involved with and which cases you won't? And, to what extent are all the lawyers you're working with out there looking versus people coming and approaching you? What does that actually look like behind the scenes when you're thinking about, should we get involved in this or shouldn't we? And how do cases come to you?
Yeah, Rebecca Markert is our legal director. She just celebrated 15 years with us. When we hired her 15 years ago, she was our first actual hire of an attorney. And for us, that was a big step. And I remember thinking, and Annie Laurie disagrees with me, but I remember thinking, will there be enough work for a full-time position? Well, of course, Annie Laurie knew. She came in with a stack of complaints. And now it's grown to 10. We had 10 attorneys. Now one of them has moved over toward the C4 organization. And there's a whole bunch of factors that come into play when you decide to take a lawsuit. You need good plaintiffs, for example, who are willing to be plaintiffs. Rarely do we, I don't think ever has our legal team ever gone out looking for work. We don't have to. It's complaints coming to us. And we often get accused, why is some out-of-state Wisconsin group meddling with our Louisiana school system? What right do you have? Well, we're not roaming the country looking for violations. There are people in that school in Louisiana with children in the school who are being affected, and they call us, and sometimes they don't want their names to be known. Sometimes they might run a local business, and do they want to be the family that's complaining against the Bible in the schools? So they come to us most of the time. Although on the C4 side, the people involved in the C4 and the lobbying side, they are actually looking and monitoring and watching bills and watching things that are going on. But as far as our legal action goes on the legal side, do we have good plaintiffs? Are the plaintiffs going to stay in town? Because if the plaintiffs leave, you can moot the case. Sometimes we have to consider, what's this court like? What are the justices like? What are our chances? Even if the chances are bad, we might decide, you know what, let's still go ahead because of the publicity value of it, because it's still right to do, even if you lose. We never take a case planning to lose, but we sometimes take cases that we're pretty sure we won't win, but it's right to take the case. Of course, also we need local counsel in each of those areas. If we are suing in Louisiana, we need an attorney there who's with us that we can hire to go ahead and do all the local work that's needed for hiring and all that. And other factors. And so there are cases that we wish we could have taken that we could not, because all the ducks were not in a row for standing and for jurisdiction and for all of these legal stuff that they have to talk about. So it's nice when we can take a case. We just filed a case last week in New Jersey. In order to register to run for public office, you have to sign some form that says, "So help me God." And there is an atheist who wants to do that, but he doesn't want to fill that form. And he's asked the state, "Why do I have to fill this out?" And they said, "Well, that's the law. That's the way it is." And so he could not run. So he's injured. He has direct legal injury. So we just filed a case challenging that. And to us, it seems like a slam dunk, because the U.S. Constitution even says there shall be no religious test for public office. And that's amounting to a religious test. And there have been other cases. We won one in Alabama over, just to register to vote in Alabama, you had to fill out a form that said, "So help me God." And we had a member of ours complain about that, and we actually got that law changed. So, and going back to the Torcaso decision in 1961, Roy Torcaso won this famous Supreme Court case. In fact, Roy was a member of our group and on our board for a while, which, to become a notary public, he had to sign "So help me God." He won that case in the Supreme Court. So it's established law federally, but a lot of states still haven't corrected their. Anyway, there's no simple way to decide what case to take, but the importance of it and the injury, especially if it's a child in the school. If there's children in the school that are being directly affected, then we really put a lot of precedent. More than half of the complaints we get in our legal team are school-related complaints. So.
I'm going to let you do the last. So one other question then. You had referenced very lightly that everyone wishes we could have like the perfect slam dunk case that would just initiate something that would shut down a lot of these other cases. What other, and it sounds like that's not the case, but are there other cases that you have, without having a direct complainant, that you or other organizations have tried to initiate? I don't know what an example would be, Pastafarians or something, to try and counter some of the religiously motivated cases that are out there.
So we probably could do that, but we don't need to. There's enough cases coming to us. It's not like we're sculpting some perfect thing, to try to go after it. There's enough actual real case and controversy coming to us that And that's where the real injury is. Somebody's got a kid in that school where the teacher is praying and making, you know what I mean? Or a Pledge of Allegiance or whatever. I guess in a dream world we could come up with some kind of a case that might work for us. But right now, one strategy that we can use, and we've used it successfully, is to stay out of the federal courts and just sue in state court. And we've had some victories in state courts. For example, in California, they were paying a chaplain at a city council to come in and pray, and they even gave him a parking pass and all. He was the official chaplain of the city. And we sued not in federal court, but in state court, because many states have really strong language. In fact, most states have stronger state church language than the federal Constitution does. So you have a higher likelihood of winning the case in state court. The problem with that is that it only applies to that state. Your victory is not universal. So you can win a case in California or in New Jersey, which we did a few years ago. By the way, the losers in that case are trying to revisit it, so they're trying to go back and get more public money when the state denied that, the court denied it. So we are asking to intervene in that case. But so there's strategies there. Sometimes state courts are nice, depending on where you are, what state you are. But that's the problem. It's not a universal federal decision then, victory.
Okay, I think we have just time for one more question.
Well, I thought there would be more time. And my last question is, since there's no more questions, would you perform and play another song or songs?
All right, if there's time for that. Well, then let me piggyback on two different composers. Charles Strauss, who wrote the musical Annie and Bye Bye Birdie and a whole bunch of great songs. He's a lifelong atheist. We had him talk at one of our conferences, and during dinner, I was in awe. I was sitting with Charles Strauss at dinner, and he's just a regular guy, and he said, You mean Richard Rodgers was an atheist? I said, yeah, and the Gershwins were non-believers? And he knew all these people. Charles Strauss is like kind of the young of the Tin Pan Alley songwriters. He's in his 90s now. Then he said, wow, and Cole Porter, of course Cole Porter was. And so during dinner, he leaned over and he said, hey, Dan, I've never written a song about my religious views or anything, and I'm a songwriter, I'm a composer. If you send me some words, I could set them to music. And I'm thinking, oh. And he said, send me some words and I'll set them to music. And so, you don't want to just send any old words to somebody like that. I mean, anybody in their next door neighbor can say, hey, I got a poem, set this to music. It took me about 6 months. It took me a long time to come up with something that I thought would be worthy of somebody like him. So I finally emailed him these lyrics, and he emailed back quickly and he said, yes, I can write a song to this. This is good. But do you mind if I edit your words a little bit? And I said, you're the pro. I mean, you're the famous Broadway composer. Yes, of course. So he took about 2/3 of my words and threw them in the trash can. He just dumped them, and he cut the thing down. And I guess that's the genius of that kind of writing. He knew how to take it and make it a nugget of a song. There's a little nod to Yip Harburg in here, who wrote all the songs in The Wizard of Oz, who I'll talk about in a second. So anyway, here's the song that I got to co-write with Charles Strauss. It's called Poor Little Me. The multitudes mumble mythologies without end, but me, I have trouble with ologies that pretend to show what can't be shown, to know what can't be known. Lutherans have liturgies, Calvinists have creeds, Muslims have their minarets, Catholics have their beads, Methodists have methods, holy truth to ascertain, But poor little me, I only have a brain. Bishops transubstantiate, Wiccans weave their spells, Transcendentalists meditate while Wiccans weave their spells. Hindus chant a mantra when they can't relieve the pain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. So fearful of the Netherland, believers band together. Unhappy with the weatherman, the Zunies wave a feather. They dance in circles to demand Great Spirit send some rain. But what do you do if you only have a brain? Quakers quake and Shakers shake, and Jews eat kosher food. Rastafarians wear their hair in pious gratitude. They all boast of miracles that no one can explain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. So fearful of the Netherland, believers band together. Unhappy with the weatherman, the Zunies wave a feather. They dance in circles to demand Great Spirit send some rain. But what do you do if you only have a brain? Quakers quake and Shakers shake, and Jews eat kosher food. Rastafarians wear their hair in pious gratitude. They all boast of miracles that no one can explain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. And that music by Charles Strauss was genius. If you're a musician, you would have heard that he broke all sorts of rules. He did a bunch of stuff I never would have thought to do, but it worked. Isn't that amazing how people can do that?
Thank you so, so much. I encourage you in just a minute to join us for coffee hour, and you can have some casual conversation and chat with Dan a little bit more, learn about his musical background and all the things the Freedom from Religion Foundation is working on right now. Thank you all, and thanks again so much to Dan Barker.